Hello everyone, this is Arsh Singh and today I'll be taking a current affairs lecture. So the topics that I will be covering from are from 20th and 21st December, and although it is the 24th of December today and hence some advancements have taken place in these issues, but I've tried to cover them in as holistic a manner as possible. So let's see the topics that we'll be covering today. Okay, so as we know, the winter session of the parliament ended on the 19th of December. So we'll be covering that. This was the winter session of the 18th Lok Sabha, first year of the 18th Lok Sabha. So that will be the first thing that we'll be seeing. Second is we'll be going through the major legislations that went ahead in this session of the parliament. And today we'll be covering only two of those, which is the 100% FDI in insurance as well as the national security, health securities and national security cess bill. Thirdly, we'll be covering the crisis in Bangladesh, the crisis also that can be said to have come forward in the India-Bangladesh relations. Then we'll be covering a judgment by the Supreme Court on child trafficking and the horrendous issue that is violating Article 23 every livid day. Next, we'll be covering the SC's judgment on corporate social responsibility and its interconnection with environmental responsibility as well. Then we'll be covering the advancements in the space sector in India and basically concerning two authorities, that is the IN-SPACE and the NSIL. We'll be going into detail between the differences of the two. Next, we'll be seeing, because India has seen historically low inflation, which is about 1% and even dropped to below 1% for the last for the last quite a few months, and hence we'll be seeing the issues due to this low inflation and a way forward to improve on this. So let's go ahead. Firstly, regarding the conclusion of the winter session of the Parliament, as the Honourable Speaker noted that the Parliament session ended with over 100% productivity. So first, let's understand what exactly that means. There are generally, before the Parliament sets in motion, the business of the Parliament is decided by the Business Advisory Committee, which is a type of a parliamentary committee, and it is headed by the respective chairpersons of the two houses, that is the Speaker in the Lok Sabha as well as the Vice President in the Rajya Sabha. So the allocated time that had been allocated for the different sessions by the two respective chairpersons was overpassed. For example, in case of the Lok Sabha, it was the productivity was about 111%, and in case of the Rajya Sabha, it was about 121%. So this is quite a good thing, because being a productive parliament is a very good stamp on the quality of Indian democracy. However, there is also one issue, and that is that this parliament only had 15 sittings over 19 days, and this is a historical low as well. So the main issue here is that the allocated number of days were less itself, and hence, although the productivity was very high, which is a good thing, the number of sessions could have been more perhaps, and that is what the opposition was also criticizing. Okay, let's come to the business of the parliament that took place here. So as we discussed, the Lok Sabha productivity and Rajya Sabha productivity were good, and total 10 bills were introduced. And 8 were passed, and these have now become acts. So we'll just very briefly see. First is the Manipur GST Amendment Bill, the Central Excise Amendment Bill, and the Health Securities and National Security Cess Bill. We'll be seeing these two in a few minutes in detail. Then we have the Appropriation Bill, the Repealing and Amendment Bill, and the Sabka Bima Sabki Raksha, which is the Insurance FDI Bill. We'll be also seeing this in a few moments. The Shanti Bill, which is regarding nuclear energy governance in the country, and also, of course, the replacement of the Manrega Bill. We'll be seeing these, most of these in the next session, but for today, we'll be focusing on these three bills. Now, if we look at the Manipur GST Second Amendment Bill, the main reason this was brought is that Manipur is still under Article 356. And hence the parliament is acting basically as the extended state legislative assembly of the state of Manipur, and hence this was passed specifically for that purpose. Then we have the appropriation bill. This was passed by the government for the purpose of supplementary grants that come under Article 116. So it's just a note from my side. It's a request to the students to try and note down all the articles as much as possible, because they become the small value addition points that you can write in your mains answers and also help you revise very well for the prelims examination as well. So yeah, and next is the repealing and amendment bill. So as was highlighted by the union minister, this was basically for the goal of ease of doing business as well as ease of living, where many old laws have been repealed. So this has repealed 71 obsolete laws. Next, we have the insurance FDI bill. We'll be going through that. Then the Shanti bill, which is regarding nuclear governance, which has led to privatization of the nuclear operations sector, which was earlier reserved only for the government. And next, the Manrega bill. Okay, so now these 8 bills have passed and have become acts. Next, we have 2 bills out of the 10 that have been referred to parliamentary committees. And this is also being criticized by the opposition, because the opposition notes that only 2 out of 10 bills, that is only 20% of the bills, were sent to the to the parliamentary committees. And this is a decreasing trend, because if we look at the trend, it goes like this. For the 15th, 16th and the 17th Lok Sabha, the percentage of bills that were sent to parliamentary committees was 71%, 25% and 13%. So this is a decreasing trend, and hence it's also a criticism of the functioning of the parliament right now. But yes, that's how it is. And the 2 bills that were sent to the parliamentary committees was the Viksit Bharat Shiksha Adhishtan bill, which is regarding unification of the regulatory agencies of higher education in India, higher education sector in India, and it has been sent to the joint parliamentary committee. And the second is the Security Markets Codes bill, which is an amalgamation of various laws regarding the security and capital market that is currently being regulated by SEBI. So this has been sent to the Department Committee on Finance, Department Standing Committee on Finance. So I think it's better that we discuss these bills when the final provisions have been finalized. So we'll be taking them later on. Next, there was also one important thing, which was a statutory resolution regarding the Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Amendment Act 2024, which was specifically passed for the purpose of Manipur. Again, as I mentioned, Manipur is still under Article 356, which is President's rule. So the Parliament is currently acting as the state has the powers of the State Legislative Assembly of Manipur, and hence this was passed under Article 252. I am going to tell the details what exactly happened here, but yeah, bear with me for a second. So yeah, so the Parliament passed this law for extending the provisions of this amendment law to Manipur, and basically the provisions are regarding decriminalization of minor offences regarding water pollution, and basically ease of doing business for the MSMEs, that is the micro, small and medium enterprises. So what happened here, this was of course this was also an ordinance that had been passed a few months ago by the president. So because there was an ordinance, it needed to be passed into a law now. And what exactly happened here, so the story goes that Article 252 mentions that if there is any subject on which the Parliament does not have the direct powers to make laws under the 7th schedule, 2 or more states can pass a resolution in that effect that they want the Parliament to legislate on behalf of them on that particular subject. So as we know, water is a state subject. Interstate river valleys is a central subject, but like we'll not go into the details right now. Water is a state subject, and because it's a state subject, the 2 states of Himachal Pradesh, and Rajasthan, they passed resolutions in that effect that they want the center to pass laws regarding Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Amendment to decriminalize the minor offences. Hence, the Parliament passed this last year. And because, and of course, since it was a central law and water is a state subject, the law got jurisdiction for the union territories as well, because they are directly under the control of the center. And now this law, provisions of this law were extended to Manipur through an ordinance under Article 123 a few months back. So now, since there was an ordinance, it needed to be passed into a proper law so that the provisions can be implemented properly, and hence this was done this time as well. Now moving on, we'll take this small opportunity to quickly go over the static part of the chapter of Parliament as well. So Parliament, as we know, is the primary legislating authority of the Indian government, of the Indian organization, political organization structure. It is basically of the three organs, that is the legislative, executive and the judiciary. It forms the primary legislative organ, and it is constituted under Articles 79, 80, 81 of the Constitution. So basically Article 79 says that the parliament should consist of president and the two houses, which is the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha, called the House of People as well as the Council of States. Then Article 80 establishes the Rajya Sabha or the Council of States. Article 81 establishes the Lok Sabha or the House of People. And Article 82 talks about the regular updation of seats in these two houses after each census. So as we know, this was fixed by two amendments, first in 76, then in 2001, for 25 years each, so that there was this whole issue that the states were not making enough efforts to decrease their population because they could get more political representation in the parliament. So this was, the number of seats was frozen, and they were not updated, and the next updation will take place post the 2027 census, as the government has noted now. And lastly, it was Article 8. We need to read about the Article 85. It talks about the prorogation as well as the dissolution of the houses of the Lok Sabha by the president. So the speaker adjourned, sine die, the parliament on 19th December, and the president prorogued the parliament on 23rd December. So we just need to see the authorities. The speaker adjourns and the president prorogues. Prorogation basically means that it's like an official end to the session of the parliament. It's just a fancy word for that. And speaker adjourns, sine die. So there are two types of adjournments that are done by the speaker. A session can be just adjourned, or it can be adjourned, sine die. Sine die, basically it's a Latin phrase that means without any date of appointment. So basically when the parliament adjourns, sine die, there is no next date of appointment or sitting of the parliament that is announced by the speaker, and this means that the session is ending. So I think that is more or less it about basically the winter session of the first year of the 18th Lok Sabha. We'll move on to the specific bills now. Okay, firstly we'll see the insurance 100% FDI bill. So the actual name of the bill is Sabka Bima Sabki Raksha Amendment of Insurance Laws Act 2025, and of course this has become an act. It's no longer a bill because the president has given assent to this bill. It basically amends three laws: the Insurance Act 1938, LIC Act 1956, and the IRDA Act 1999. I think the most important act here and the authority that we need to study for the purpose of prelims as well as mains is the IRDA Act 1999. We'll just see the provisions in a few minutes. So basically what the provisions of the bill are: 100% FDI and automatic route. That's more or less it, the main thing that we need to remember. Firstly, 100% FDI means that the ownership in new insurance companies that are being established through foreign capital in India can be 100%. They do not need to have Indian partners. So earlier, through an amendment, I think 2 or 3 years ago, the parliament has increased the FDI limit of insurance sector to 75% from the earlier 49 and the 25%. So here a foreign company could have 75% ownership in the new insurance venture, but they needed 25% ownership. They needed an Indian partner for the remaining 25% ownership, and this means that they needed to have joint ventures. And during the debate, introduction of this bill in the parliament, the honorable finance minister had noted that there was a lot of hassle and very difficult for the foreign companies to establish joint ventures with Indian companies. And so basically to increase ease of doing business, to bring foreign capital into the country, to increase the competition in the insurance sector in the country, so which will also reduce premiums in the long run, the foreign FDI possibility has been increased to 100%, and this is under the automatic route. That means that there needs to be no government authority or that needs to authorize this investment into the country. I think yes, that is more or less it. Other than that, there have been a few small things that have been passed in this insurance, in this FDI, in this law as well, and that is that the LIC has gotten more autonomy in terms of ensuring expansion of its centers in the rural areas of the country, which will further increase the insurance penetration and the insurance density also. We'll be discussing these two terms in a few moments, and that is more or less it. So the main opposition that has been coming for this act by the other parties is that it will lead to opening up of a very socially important sector, that is the insurance sector, to foreign capital and perhaps even foreign interests. So it is important to know that although this might be true to an extent, but there are still a lot of conditions and restrictions that are going to be there in this sector. For example, the IRDA still remains the primary regulatory body. That IRDAI is basically the Insurance Regulatory and Development Authority of India, and it's a statutory body under the 1999 Act. And a statutory body, just a small digression, is a body that has a legal backing under a law passed by the Parliament on through a valid procedure, and so IRDAI is a statutory body. Moving on, the IRDAI still remains the primary regulatory body, and every single company, foreign, Indian, does not matter, needs a registration certificate from the IRDAI. Also, there are other legal implications for these companies coming to the country as well. For example, the FEMA Act, which is the Foreign Exchange Management Act 1999, which is overseen by the RBI, also has a lot of legal requirements that the companies need to ensure that there is no black money coming, there is no foreign money coming into the country which is not accounted for in the proper records of the company. So this will also ensure there is no money laundering, and hence it will reduce the vested interests that might take control of this socially sensitive sector in the country, and hence there are still quite a lot of uh, uh, checks and balances which will ensure that the sector remains healthy. Also, moving on, other benefits will also be there of bringing this 100% FDI in the insurance sector. I already mentioned that there will be a lot of good foreign investment coming, and this will also release the INR pressure, basically the pressure on the Indian currency, because it is currently depreciating quite a lot. As we know that it passed the 91 to the dollar mark. So bringing in foreign investment will help release some pressure on the INR. Secondly, there will be capital infusion, there will be technology infusion, there will be better insurance products also that are of a global recognition in the country. Also, this will increase the, as I mentioned earlier, it will increase the competition in the country and will hence reduce the premiums that are being paid by the people as well. Next, there are also possibilities of mergers of insurance and non-insurance firms if the final company is basically an insurance company. So it's a measure of ease of doing business now, which this was not allowed earlier. Then of course I mentioned the LIC autonomy regarding regional offices, and of course the monetary penalties have been increased so that the sector remains healthy and the competition remains healthy and people are not pleased, that is excessive money is not taken from them. And other than these legal requirements, there are some requirements that have been brought in this law as I mentioned, checks and balances, that amongst the key management personnel of this 100% foreign owned venture, insurance venture in India, some key management personnel of the CEO level need to be resident Indians. This has been mentioned in the law. Hence, it's a very good, I would say, regulatory check to ensure that Indians are getting the actual benefits of this foreign investment and companies coming in. Next, there is also a provision that all the premium that is collected by these foreign ventures from Indians in the country needs to stay in the country. It cannot be taken outside, and hence this will ensure that these foreign companies that are coming, they are investing in the country in terms of expanding their business, in terms of increasing the insurance penetration amongst the Indian populace itself. So the premium of the Indian people is being used for the benefit of the Indian people themselves, which is also a very good thing. And of course, after the DPDP Act came 2020 in 2023, which is the Digital Personal Data Protection Act, the provisions of the new insurance companies, they need to abide by all the privacy provisions of this act. Now, I think it's better that we take this small opportunity to very quickly see the Indian insurance sector and what's happening here. Is it good? Is it bad? So earlier, as I was discussing, I mentioned two terms just to reduce the distraction, the next news item. So I mentioned two terms, which is insurance density and insurance penetration. So it's important to remember what these exactly mean. So insurance penetration is basically the total premium collected by the insurance companies as a percentage of the GDP of the nation, and insurance density is the total premium collected by the insurance companies per capita of the populace. So as percentage of GDP, India's insurance penetration is 3.8%. It's 3.8% against global 7%, and insurance density, that is premium per capita in India, is $90 against global 900. So as we can see that India's insurance penetration is still not as bad, but the density is extremely bad. And even in the penetration, so insurance penetration basically seen in terms of two categories of life insurance and non-life insurance. Non-life basically is property insurance, health insurance, etc., etc. And in India, although life insurance penetration is quite good, non-life insurance penetration is not at par with the global averages at all. And the same is in the case with insurance density as well. So if we have to take one thing from here, I think it's to remember the difference between penetration and density. I think it's important to correlate it with the metric. It's like an analogy, not exactly a correlation, an analogy. If we look at the term of population density, so population density is basically seen that the number of people, that is people per the number of people in a limited region. So it is related to people, population density. So if we just take an analogy from that, density will mean relation to people. So premium divided by the number of people, that is premium per capita. So it's just a way to remember the term that insurance density is related to number of people and penetration is related to the premium as percentage of GDP. And hence this means that the Indian people are heavily underinsured. This means that they are, as it is often said, that many people say that, and any Indian family is just one health crisis away from complete destruction, financial destruction at least. So this is what they mean, that Indian people are underinsured. And also because basically the money that we give to insurance companies, the premium that we give to insurance companies, they invest those in productive assets. It could be infrastructure, it could be anything else. So because the penetration and density in India is less, the capital that goes into such infrastructure creation by the insurance companies is also less. So it's like a lose-lose game. It's like a negative sum game. No one is winning here. So the penetration and density of insurance products in India needs to increase, and for that I would say that this is an excellent bill. Of course it needs to be ensured that the competition is good, the competition remains healthy, because there might be many huge scale companies from foreign nations that might come into India and can compete with the domestic firms. But even then, if the competition is ensured that it's healthy, I think it can be a very good step. Moving on, regarding our insurance sector, I think that we talk about mains answers, right? So generally I don't think that it's a little difficult for a question to come only on the insurance sector, but if it does, I think that this can be an excellent conclusion for IRDAI, that is the goal of insurance for all by 2047. And it's a very worthy goal, and if it is achieved, it can help secure our families in terms of socio-economic parameters of their, be it in terms of health or accidents or any other tragedy. Now the IRDAI has brought three pillars to achieve this insurance for all by 2047 goal, which is the Bima Sugam, the Bima Vistar, and the Bima Vahak. So the Bima Sugam is basically an online portal that is an extension of the digital public infrastructure of the Indian government, which is an excellent step. And it is all being touted as perhaps the UPI moment for the insurance sector, because the Bima Sugam portal is connecting the insurance providers, insurance service providers, as well as the people who own the insurance products, and hence it is like transparency. There is checks and balances. There is formalization of the sector. All good things are happening on this portal, and it is going live. I think it went live last month. I'll just have to check once. But yes, it's an excellent step to increase insurance penetration and density. Second is Bima Vistar. It's basically a product, insurance product that has been launched by IRDAI and is being promoted by Indian government insurers like LIC. And what it is, it's a combination to target the lower middle class families in the country, and it's a combination of life insurance, health insurance, and property insurance, and the premium is fixed, so there can be no usurious claims that can be made by the insurance companies, and this will help again in insurance penetration and density. And then is Bima Vahak. Bima Vahak are basically a group of the women distribution groups that are there at the grassroots level to expand the reach of the Bima Vistar insurance product, basically awareness generation that will be taken forward by the Bima Vahaks. And if there is one way forward that can be worked upon, and it's very tangible to write also, is that the insurance premium still attracts 18% GST, and I think that going ahead this can perhaps be reduced or let go of as well. I think that is more or less it with the insurance sector. We can move on. Next is a combination of two bills that were passed again in this winter session by the Parliament, and they are regarding the the discontinuation of GST compensation cess. So a very brief overview on what the GST compensation cess was. It has been stopped now, and it was a follow-up of the GST regime that was introduced in 2016 by the 101st Constitutional Amendment Act. And the GST compensation cess was basically a mechanism that would have ensured that the tax resources, the tax revenues of the state governments did not reduce just after the implementation of the GST, because it was a new system. It was still gathering its feet. It was it still required a lot of reform, and hence this mechanism of GST compensation cess was brought in to ensure that the state revenues did not decrease, and it was imposed on thin goods mainly. Thin goods are basically things that are not good for you or your health. Alcohol, cigarettes, BD, pan, tobacco, other tobacco products, smokeless tobacco, and all these thin goods had increased in price because of the GST compensation cess. Hence, now since the cess has gone, GST compensation cess has gone, since the cess has gone, the price of these products would have reduced naturally because the cess was not there. Hence, the Central Excise Amendment Act has been brought in. This basically targets tobacco and tobacco products. And now excise duty is basically charged on the manufacture of products. So this excise duty, which is the tax on manufacturing of these tobacco and tobacco products, has been increased, and by quite a large margin, to satiate for this GST compensation cess, so that the prices of cigarettes do not reduce, and also to slowly, as the Honorable Finance Minister noted, to slowly wean off the tobacco farmers from tobacco cultivation and towards other productive crops as well. Because as we again need to remember that we need to balance health of the larger Indian society with the livelihoods of these very impoverished farmers, basically in the as far as I'm aware, in the Telangana Andhra Pradesh belt, where tobacco is grown at quite a large scale. And yes, so this was the first thing. Next is, of course, it's a very good step this way, and of course it's also true that in the new taxation GST reform that was done during Diwali, somewhere around it, there was a new tax slab introduced specifically for sin goods of 40% GST. So of course 40% GST is still there on sin goods, and of course this increased central excise duty will further increase the price of cigarettes and all these sin goods, and which is a good step to reduce the demand. And Also, as was mentioned by the government very prominently, that the since it's an excise duty and not a cess or a surcharge, which tend to be non-divisible with the states, the central excise duty and its increased revenues will be part of the central divisible pool under Article 270 of the Constitution. So again, I'm mentioning here, I have tried to put the constitutional provisions as much as possible. Try and note them down. It's very important to write them in mains as part of your value addition. So Article 270 explicitly states that all taxes collected need to be part of the divisible pool, and they need to be devolved to the states through mechanisms like the Finance Commission. The Finance Commission is not explicitly mentioned in Article 270, but yes, that's what it means, that they need to be divided amongst the states. So by the 80th amendment, 80th constitutional amendment 2000, in the year 2000, cesses and surcharges were removed from Article 270, and hence they do not form a part of the central divisible pool now. So basically they are not distributed with the states, and that's also a very strong criticism that is being done by the state governments. We'll discuss that when we come here. First, let's focus on this only. Otherwise, it will be too big of a digression. And it's good that the central excise duty will be part of the central divisible pool as per Article 270. Moving on a similar note, the Health Security, say National Security Cess Act 2025 has also been passed, and it basically will start is to start imposing the health and national security cess on, very specifically, pan masala manufacturing units. So as we know, the pan masala industry in India, we are probably one of the few nations where this is almost like a 4,000 crore industry, and because pan masalas tend to be very, very cheap in terms of their per unit cost, this health and national security cess will help increasing the price of these. And what exactly this does, it does not put a cess on the final product. It puts a cess on the manufacturing units. So that's a very good step to reduce the leakages of this cess that the firms might, private firms might engage in. So it is on the pan masala manufacturing unit capacity, basically. That's how the cess is decided. And although cesses in general, as I mentioned, were removed from Article 270 by 80th Constitutional Amendment Act, the Honorable Finance Minister has very explicitly stated that the health security and national security cess will be shared with the state governments for health schemes, health sector schemes. So that is a very good thing, and mainly because public health still remains a state subject under 7th schedule. And a small digression, the 7th schedule consists of the 3 lists, that is the union, state and the concurrent lists, which decide the legislating subjects for and the legislating powers of the parliament as well as the state legislatures. And of course, this is a very good step because India remains, the tobacco problem in India remains still very, very significant. There was a global adult tobacco survey, and as per it, 42% of men and 14% of women in India consume tobacco, and India still consumes 70% of the world's smokeless tobacco. So this is a very, very bad metric, and I think that this is a very good step here. Next is, of course, the state support post removal of GST compensation cess will ensure. Okay, so the state support post removal of GST compensation cess will also ensure that the state governments, they are not deprived of their revenue on a very quick note. Basically, this will help them gradually adjust to removal of the GST compensation cess, because as the finance minister mentioned, these cess revenues will be shared with the state governments as well. And of course, it's a very good step in cooperative federalism as well as fiscal federalism. And yes, so basically cooperative federalism in short means the spirit of Team India, where the states and the center do not compete but collaborate and grow together. And fiscal federalism are basically steps that are taken to ensure proper devolution of funds from the center to the states, because as we know, the constitution the constitution mainly has ensured that the financial revenues tend to be more with the central government, and the responsibilities of execution of very important subjects like police, public order, land, health, water, they remain with the state governments. Hence, we need to have very strong fiscal federalism mechanisms to ensure that finances are devolved from the central government to the state government, and the Finance Commission under Article 280 is one such constitutional authority that has the responsibility to do so. I think that is more or less it with these two acts. Now we'll just very quickly look at cesses and surcharges and what's the status of them right now in general. Why are they controversial? Firstly, so the state governments and many opposition parties have ensured that the current NDA government has seen that the financial resources are being centralized, and that is being done through increased dependence of the central government on cesses and surcharges, which are non-divisible with the state governments. And this is being seen, and this is a very small metric that can be remembered for the purpose of mains, that the share in central gross tax revenue of cesses and surcharges has increased from about 13% in financial year 16 to 19% in financial year 2024. And of course, since this is not part of the central divisible pool under Article 270, it becomes a problem for the states. And there have been reports, for example, there was a CAG report that even when the cesses and surcharges are being absorbed by the central government, they are still being misused. For example, the CAG report highlighted that the government of India failed to transfer 3.7 lakh crore worth of cess funds to the intended reserve. So yes, a very quick note. I don't have a lot of space to write, but a very quick note on the difference between cess and surcharge. So cess basically is used for one specific pre-intended purpose, and surcharges are generally used for normal like general funding of the government, and cesses are additional duties and surcharges are taxes on taxes. So if we look at surcharge, the highest income tax slab, for example, in the country is 30%, but if we further keep on increasing the income, then there is a surcharge on the tax that is being given at the higher income slabs. And if we look at the cesses, there are various different forms of cesses that are additional duties. For example, as I mentioned, the health securities and national security cess is there. Then there is a building and other construction workers welfare cess. Then there is a road construction workers cess. So these are, as the name of these cesses mentioned, they are predetermined, and their purpose is predetermined. And because their purpose is predetermined, they have their own intended reserves. For example, there will be a health securities and national security cess fund, and all this cess will go into that fund. But the government, the CAG report highlighted that the government of India had failed to transfer 3.7 lakh crore worth of cess funds into their pre-intended funds, and hence this basically means that they were used elsewhere. They were used for other purposes, which is basically misappropriation of funds, as the CAG has noted. Next, we know that cesses and surcharges are also becoming controversial because even if we consider the funds that are supposed to be devolved by the central government to the state governments on the recommendation of the Finance Commission under Article 280, even they are not being done properly. For example, 15th Finance Commission had recommended 41% of central divisible pool to be devolved to the states every single year from 2021 to 2026. That's the term of the 15th Finance Commission report recommendation. However, in financial year 2024, only 31% of the central divisible pool was devolved. Hence, the states have problem with this. And of course, this further aggravates the issue of increased cesses and surcharges. Next, if we note that the 16th Finance Commission has been set, and it already gave the report to the President in November 2025, because from April 2026, the 16th Finance Commission tenure will start. The states have been demanding 50% of the central divisible pool from the 16th Finance Commission because of these very reasons, that the central divisible pool in itself is not increasing that much because the center is relying on cesses and surcharges, which are not part of that, and also because even when the Finance Commission recommends a particular amount, that is not also being devolved as noted here. I think that is more or less it with the cesses and surcharges part, and all of this forms part of GS2, GS3 mixture. Basically, that's what it is. As I mentioned here, GS2, governance polity, parliament, state legislatures, we need to know the functioning of those, the main bills, acts that are being passed. That is more or less it. Okay, next we come to GS2, international relations. the Bangladesh crisis, political crisis, socio-economic crisis, and also an international relations crisis, because there has been a very strong downturn in India-Bangladesh relations, especially post the ouster of former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina of the Awami League in August 2024 in what was called the August Resolution or the Monsoon Revolution, because it took place in that season. Okay, so let's first analyze the news chronology. We are seeing downturn of the India-Bangladesh relations from what Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi a few years ago called the Shonali Adhyay, that is the golden era of India-Bangladesh relations, to a very strong period of hostility. Yes. Okay. So firstly, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina was ousted in August 2024, and the main reasons for that were the main triggering point was that the Supreme Court of Bangladesh had reinstated a quota for the relatives of freedom fighters of the 71 Liberation War, and that led to very strong criticism of that judgment, because uh, many of the opposition leaders, student leaders also were criticizing the Awami League that that quota was being misused by the Awami League party to fill all the institutions of the state with their own people, with their own basically their own allies, their friends, people they know, and people who listen to them. And next, after that, the riots became violent. The government also came down hard. Basically, I think more than 100 people, 100 students especially, were killed by the riot police of Bangladesh, and hence that led to ouster of the prime minister. Then in the same month, former Nobel laureate Muhammad Yunus became the chief advisor of the interim regime. So this is still not a legitimate government, it's an interim regime. This is important to remember, that this is still an unelected interim regime. So very quickly, if we look at the chronology of the events: regime change, monsoon revolution, then Muhammad Yunus became the chief advisor. Then there was very strong anti-India rhetoric from Dhaka, because, and this was also being seen because after Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's ouster, the very radical elements of Bangladesh polity and society, which had been sidelined by the Awami League party, are coming to the center stage, and the main party that is in news these days is the Jamaat-e-Islami. So there was a very recent interview by a former Indian ambassador also, and she was saying that the Jamaat-e-Islami is almost a direct proxy of the Pakistani military as well. So as we are seeing that radical elements are taking root in Bangladesh polity, society, and also in their student organizations. And this has seen a revival of the ties of India, of Bangladesh and Pakistan as well. And in 2024 only, there was a maritime connect with Pakistan, where the trading ship of Pakistan took to the Chittagong port. Then there was an arrest of a Hindu leader also, which further brought criticism from the Indian government, the Indian public as well, and also by various moderate elements in the Bangladesh society also. Then very recently, last month, there was an international criminal tribunal which has sentenced Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina to a death sentence. However, it is being very criticized because the trial has been in absentia. And what that means is that Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina was not given a lawyer of her choice, and basically she was not heard. There was, if you look at the principles of natural justice, they were very clearly violated, as not all the parties were heard, but still the judgment has come. Then currently the riots and violence has further increased and revived in Bangladesh, mainly because the death of student leader Sharif Usman Hadi, who can be called the fulcrum of the August Revolution in 2024, and the primary student leader that had led to the ouster of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. So of course the people are blaming Awami League leaders of killing him, but again there is still no conclusive report on that. There have been only accusations and counter accusations. Moving on, there has been a strong diplomatic standoff between India and Bangladesh now. Both governments have accused each other of being hostile to minority elements. Again, there was very recently a Hindu youth was hung from a tree and burned, and again, then there were some so-called counterattacks inside our country as well. So this has been it is still a developing news item. So we'll go ahead right now. And the main reason why the Bangladesh polity and society are angry with India is because they see India as a partisan actor in Bangladesh domestic politics, and we are accused of shielding Sheikh Hasina. We are also accused of being very strong allies with the Awami League and not exactly with the Bangladesh people. And this is why we are being seen as one strong party who supported the so-called authoritarian rule of the former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina in Bangladesh. Okay, and last year, the Bangladesh government had sent a note verbal on to the Indian government to extradite her back. Now, it's important to here note that a note verbal is not an official diplomatic request, and that's what many of the Indian journalists are pointing out, that the current Bangladesh government has still not given an official request for a diplomatic request for extraditing Sheikh Hasina, and that is mainly, as far to my understanding, that is probably because the current Bangladesh government is not a legitimate one. It's still an interim regime, so perhaps it can't do that. But anyway, this is the current status. It gave a note verbal, and hence firstly the Indian government also pointed out that the diplomatic formalities have not been done regarding this request, and also even if a formal request come, India can still refuse because the extradition treaty of 2013, which was amended in 2016, has exemptions regarding political offences and requests made not in good faith. So I think that these are fairly wide ranging, and of course, like, the Indian government can refuse the request if it wants to. And I think that's what it has done till now, and what it will be doing, because very recently the external affairs minister was asked if shielding Sheikh Hasina was enough a reason to uh, worsen the ties between India and Bangladesh governments. And the external affairs minister had very rightly noted that it is Sheikh Hasina's decision if she till when she wants to stay, because she is a political refugee. She has taken political asylum in the country, and she has been a friend to the Indian government for quite some time. And there has been a very good history of India and Bangladesh relations under her regime. So that's why it's her decision till when she wants to stay. Now, of course, this turn of hostility between India and Bangladesh has been is being exploited by other partners as well, not to call them partners, other countries in the region as well. Firstly, as I mentioned, there has been an uptick in the Bangladesh-Pakistan military relations. As I mentioned, there was a ship that took port in Chittagong last year of Pakistan, and that was done after quite a few decades. Again, there has been there was even some informal talks of Pakistan and Bangladesh collaborating on civil nuclear energy, and also there has been a very strong uh, meetings of senior leaders of the military of Pakistan and Bangladesh, and there are some commentators who have noted that there might be a defense pact in the talks, something akin to what Saudi Arabia and Pakistan have very recently signed. So these are still in the talks, and there is no confirmation on this, but yes, this will be an interesting thing to follow through. Next, of course, China is there, our primary strategic adversary. So China is, of course, Bangladesh was already a part of the Belt and Road Initiative, and hence has received quite a lot of infrastructure funds from China. Now, regarding the current hostilities, there have been many news that China is trying to revive the old air base in Lamonir Hat in Bangladesh, which is situated very close to the Chicken's Neck, that is India's Siliguri corridor. So this will give China some strategic depth inside Bangladesh, and also Bangladesh some military leverage against India. But of course, India is not sitting quiet. There has been quite a strong military response by India in terms of at least preparations in any way that are required. There have been 3 new forward military garrisons that have been raised. one in Kishanganj, that is in Bihar, then Chopra garrison, that is North Bengal, and of course there has also been the Hashimara Air Force Station, which is very close to the Siliguri corridor, and the Hashimara base has Rafale and BrahMos both equipped with it, so that's quite a strong base. Then of course there is also in Assam there is the Lachit military base, that is in the Dhubri garrison. That is also a very forward military base that has prepared India for any eventuality whatsoever. Now, if we look at, we have seen quite a lot of tensions between India and Bangladesh. Now, if we have to look at a way forward for the India-Bangladesh ties, it's very important for us that yes, the current radical elements in Bangladesh have almost hijacked the current narrative between India and Bangladesh, and it is leading to a lot of hostility and vitriolic statements from both sides. However, it's important that India also needs to realize that it needs to shift from a personality based to a state centric approach for managing its ties with Dhaka, because there is some amount of credibility to the statement that yes, India's relations with Bangladesh earlier were more centered around the Awami League party. Of course, it's not a completely justified statement, but yes, there are some uh, reasons to believe that. So it is important for India to move towards from personality to a state-centric approach in Bangladesh. And Shashi Tharoor, he's the former Minister of State for External Affairs in India, and of course also the former Under Secretary General of the United Nations. He has very nicely articulated one way forward that India needs to change its priorities, and if we have to put a hierarchy of priorities for India, it should be the Bangladeshi people first, the Bangladeshi state second, and of any leader, be it Sheikh Hasina or any other leader, third. I think this is a very good way forward for India-Bangladesh relations. Next, we need to, as difficult as it might be, there needs to be direct talks, or if not direct, some back channel diplomatic talks with the moderate sections of the Bangladesh National Party as well as the Jamaat, because these parties also have very elaborate organizational structures, and there are always opposing factions. So we need to exploit those. Next, former Ambassador Shyam Saran has very nicely pointed out that yes, there are many tensions with Bangladesh, but they mostly are in the short term, and short term could mean 3-4 years also. But yes, they are mostly in the short term, because if we look at the hard reality on the ground, it is that Bangladesh cannot escape its geography. It is surrounded on three sides by one country and one country only, and that is India. It cannot, at least in the long run, afford to have acrimonious relations with India. So we need to show strategic patience. We need to show strategic patience so that the on ground very hard logic of geoeconomics, that is connectivity, trade, geography, they they realize themselves. So we need to have strategic patience and slowly uh, start opening one border post, then start giving increasing trade from one other border post, and that way we'll start establishing geo-economic relations, and perhaps even move towards what how the situation was earlier, which was that Bangladesh was the largest Indian trading partner in the Indian subcontinent. So we can definitely achieve that situation again. And of course, there is also a lot of scope for engaging Bangladesh in multilateral initiatives. Firstly, if we look at the BIMSTEC, that is the Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multi-Sectoral Technical and Economic Cooperation. It is a it is an 8-member nation, 7-member group, which has members from South Asia as well as Southeast Asia, and Bangladesh and India both are part of it. So if we try and engage Bangladesh through that, there can be some strategic convergences as well. And Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia has noted that with Bangladesh, there is also a scope for trilateral participation, where India, with not just its own funds, can also bring like-minded countries like Japan, which are very pro in giving development funds to developing nations like both India and Bangladesh, and establish trilateral cooperations. For example, the BIDGE trilateral, Bangladesh, India, Japan. And that way we can go take these multi-dimensional steps to increase India's ties with Bangladesh, and perhaps it can be hoped that if these steps are taken forward, we can revert our relations back to the so-called Shonali Adhyaya. Okay, that is it with Bangladesh. We will very quickly go on to the next topic, which is regarding a Supreme Court judgment, that is KP Kiran Kumar versus Karnataka, that was given 4 days ago, 19th of December, as far as I can recall the date, and it is regarding child trafficking, which remains a horrendous tragedy even in 21st century India, and not just India, globally, as was very recently seen in the Epstein files. We'll limit our discussion to the Indian judgment, Indian Supreme Court judgment right now, but yes, um, it is a global reality. As sad as it might be, but yes, it's a reality. Okay, so the KP Kiran Kumar judgment, the Supreme Court has noted that child trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation of children militates against the very core foundational principles of Article 21, which is dignity and bodily integrity. So, first of all, just a small digression. I'm mentioning the Supreme Court judgment here because Article 21 is a very popular topic with the UPSC, especially for the mains examination. I think in 2023 there was a specific question on the expansion of right to life and personal liberty, right? Like a whole, I think I'm forgetting if it was a 10 or a 15 marker, but yes, there was a whole question just on Article 21. So I think such judgments can really add value to your answers. But yes, moving on. So this judgment, Supreme Court had noted that the child trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation of children militates against the dignity and bodily integrity of them. Also, it has one thing which it has done very nicely is that it has called for easier standards from children in terms of the testimony and evidence that they give. So basically, what happened here is that uh, okay, I'm not going to go into the gruesome details, but yes, court, I think it was a high court, some high court, it went against the judgment of, went against the evidence and the testimony of a minor girl when she could not completely tell what the dimensions of the room were in which she was kept. So that's what the court noted here, that if we look at the very traumatic experience of such children, she was a kid, then might not be very possible to accurately recall all and every single detail that takes place. So that's why it's important that the courts, they approach such cases with compassion, with empathy and integrity, and ensure that easier testimony and evidentiary standards are enforced. This will help in uh, convicting the actual criminals first, and not see even those kids with a suspicious eye. Okay, and of course this is a direct this has direct implications for the Article 21, which is right to life and personal liberty of the Constitution, also one of the most important fundamental rights. Then of course it has relevance for Article 23, which is part of right against exploitation, and this very explicitly prohibits traffic in human beings and forced labor. So this is a direct correlation. This judgment has a direct correlation with Article 23. Also, this Supreme Court judgment also has direct correlations with Article 38, which explicitly calls for social and economic justice from the state. Of course, like since this is part of the DPSPs, it's a directive for the state to enforce social and economic justice in the country. Then this is also directly correlated with Article 39 Clause F, which calls for healthy development of children. And I'm just mentioning these because they are very good fodder points for your mains answers. And the Immoral Traffic Prohibition Act 1956 and the POXO Act of 2012, these are basically the two primary legislations that deal with these issues of child trafficking, child sexual exploitation, as well as child pornography and cyber pornography as well. I think that is more or less it regarding this. But yes, also one thing important, that often the judiciary is criticized for judicial overreach, negative judicial activism. I would say this judgment is a very good example of positive judicial activism, and hence this can be noted as an example for that as well, where the Immoral Traffic Prohibition Act was lagging. The Supreme Court jumped in to call for easier evidence and testimony standards from children. So I think that it expands the scope of the Immoral Traffic Prohibition Act in a very good way. Next, if we have to look at a way forward for this malaise in the society, sensitization of all stakeholders emerges as one of the most primary aspects of it. It needs to be ensured that children are held with care, and especially from all stakeholders like the police and also other child welfare officers that are there as per the Protection of Child Rights Act. It's important that they are all sensitized, and the mental health and both the mental and physical health of children are taken care of. And also there was a recommendation by the Malimat committee which was said to recommend on criminal justice system reforms. The Malimat committee had noted that it is important that legal, psychiatric and medical help is given to victims, and this will help in improving the conviction ratios as well, because if such help is timely given to victims, they can even help in forming the cases in a much better manner, give better evidence, memory through their memory, and also better testimonies. And okay, I by mistake wrote this as a separate point, but this is a recommendation by the Malimat committee only, that it also recommended a victim compensation fund, and such problems can really be tackled if such victim compensation funds are established, because the direct help to victims, again like I mentioned, can help in improving the case files as well. I think that is more or less it with this news item. We can move on to the next one. Okay, so this is also this is not a judgment per se, but an observation or an interpretation that was made by the court, and this is a continuation of the M.K. Ranjit Singh judgment. So this is a recent judgment where the Supreme Court had noted that that the right against adverse effects of climate change form part of Article 14 and 21 of the Constitution. But the background of this case, that's more important. So this case is basically between this case has been filed by petitioners, because the renewable energy infrastructure that is coming up in and around the Thar Desert area, which has a lot of solar parks, by the way. So a lot of renewable energy infrastructure, power lines are also coming up in that region, and that also happens to be the primary habitat of the Great Indian Bustard. So because of these power lines, the Great Indian Bustard have started seeing very sharp falls in their population, because I'll tell you what the Great Indian Bustard is. It is one of the heaviest flying birds that are there globally, and this was also a very strong contender for the Indian national bird, but the peacock beat the Great Indian Bustard to that. But anyway, see, because this bird is such a majestic bird, and it has seen a very almost more than a 90% drop in its population, and is now limited to very few regions of the Thar Desert, like the Desert National Park. This actually becomes a very alarming situation right now, because such a well-meaning infrastructure, basically renewable energy is green energy, which is well-meaning, is actually leading to negative externalities in the form of decreasing population of the Great Indian Bustard. So that's what the petitioners wanted from the court, that it needed to give a judgment to put all the power infrastructure underground. So this has also seen some progression. Firstly, there was a court judgment that noted that all the power lines need to go underground. Then the court itself noted that it might not be financially feasible for all the companies to do all the power lines underground, so some can be above the ground. So this has seen some back and forth, but yes, that's what the case background is about. So currently what the court has noted after all these observations is that the SC brought the companies, it basically expanded this for all companies, but in this background it expanded this judgment for all companies. The Supreme Court noted that as part of corporate social responsibility, the companies need to also show some environmental responsibility as well, because if the companies are showing social responsibility, it might not be uh, completely wise of them to absolve themselves of any and all environmental responsibilities. Hence they need to show environmental stewardship as well. And this environmental responsibility and stewardship becomes a legal and constitutional obligation, because the court expanded the ambit of Article 51 AG to companies as well. Article 51 AG is basically, yes, Article 51 AG is part of fundamental duties, and it talks about the fundamental duty to protect and improve nature, wildlife, environment, and compassion for living creatures. So the code basically meant that this is not reserved only for individual citizens but also for companies, and the companies, along with corporate social responsibility, must also include environmental responsibility, and it is a form of environmental stewardship. Now I included GS4 here as well because environmental ethics are a very strong aspect. Questions do come on environmental ethics as well. Hence these keywords that I'm talking about. Environmental responsibility as an extension of corporate social responsibility, environmental stewardship, green economy, shallow versus deep ecologism, polluter pays principle, compassionate capitalism. These are all very good environmental ethical principles and keywords that you can include in your answers. And corporate governance is an explicit part that is there in the GS4 syllabus also. So yes, please keep that in mind. So we can analyze this case from all these aspects like corporate environmental responsibility and environmental stewardship of the companies I already talked about. And of course, the aspect of green economy is here, but it needs to be balanced with environmental biodiversity also. Green economy balance with environment biodiversity. Then of course, shallow versus deep ecologism. If we talk about what is ecologism, is basically an ideology that places nature first. So there are two types of ecologism, shallow and deep. Shallow ecologism is basically human centric, that if let's say I'm a person who is contributing for the welfare of the environment, I'm doing charity. Shallow ecologists see environmental giving towards the environment as charity, that I'm not obligated to do it, I'm just doing it because I can. It's like that. So it's charity. But deep ecologists see it as a very different thing. They see that the earth and its living creatures were here first, and we are a part of the larger whole of the entire planet. So we need to see our contributions towards the environment not as charity but as responsibility and obligation. So basically they are raising the bar of environmental ethical principles here, and that's what deep ecologists stand for: charity versus responsibility. Of course, then there's the polluter pays principle as well, and that's very straightforward, that whoever pollutes must pay for the repercussions of it and to improve the repercussions of it. Then compassionate capitalism is also a concept that has been forwarded by the uh, founder CEO of Infosys, that is Narayan Murthy. He talks about the people, planet, profit balance that needs to be taken care of by companies, because if we if the companies end up compromising on any one of these three, that is people, planet, and profit, they might not become sustainable in the long run. So these are the environmental ethical principles. Now there are some keywords that were mentioned here. I'm just talking about them for general knowledge. Ex situ and in situ conservation. There might be some questions that these terms might be used in. So in situ conservation first. In situ conservation is basically when the biodiversity of that area is being conserved in its own personal natural habitat. And national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, community reserves, and also sacred groves, these are all parts of in situ conservation. Ex situ conservation is when these living creatures are taken out from their natural habitat and then conserved. Let's say this could be in zoological parks, that zoos, then there can be botanical parks for plants, and also sometimes in captive centers, because let's say there are some animals whose population is so less that they can't be left in the wild. Then they need to be taken from their natural habitat and bred properly in animal shelters, captive centers, and then taken to their own wild natural habitat. This way it's ensured that their population does not decrease. Moving on, some aspects about corporate social responsibility, because it has been mentioned here. I'll just briefly touch on it. India was one of the first to make it legally mandatory under Companies Act 2013. So basically what corporate social responsibility is, that a fraction of profits, I think it's 2% of the profits of last 3 years, need to be spent for environmentally and socially important aspects. For example, it could be either skilling the underprivileged, or it could be health, education, sanitation, etc., etc. The companies can choose, but yes, it's a legal mandate. And also, to ensure that it is being done properly, companies who have a certain aspect of profit level, above a certain profit level, they need to establish committees of for overseeing the operations of CSR. So it's not to be taken lightly, basically. That's what I mean here. And I think that this CSR, the CSR mandate under Companies Act, can be cited as a very good example of compassionate capitalism being seen in the real world. Now, if we look at the way forward for CSR, of course, like for this, there needs to be this main aspect regarding this whole Great Indian Bustard issue, is that we need to manage environmental and sustainable growth with biodiversity and its habitat. And if we look at way forward for corporate social responsibility, the Injeti Srinivas committee has given some nice points that there needs to be timely use of unspent CSR funds. There needs to be third party assessment of CSR projects to ensure that they are of good quality. And of course, there needs to be a balanced use of funds. So what the committee meant by balanced here is that so there was a small study that was done. It was found that a lot of the CSR funds, close to 60 to 70% of the CSR funds, were specifically being used for one or two fields and not for others. So the two fields they were being used for were health and education, and not so much for sanitation, malnutrition, etc., etc. So what the committee basically meant was that the funds need to be diversified and used in a more balanced manner to ensure better returns from in terms of malnutrition and sanitation as well. So that is more or less it. I think we have comprehensively covered the concept of CSR and this Great Indian Bustard issue. Okay, quickly moving on. So this is of course GS3, science and tech, space, all the good things happening in the country. So what is exactly this news? So I brought this news here to basically talk about two authorities, the InSpace and the NSIL, which was responsible for this second project one. So both InSpace and NSIL, they are bodies that have been established by the government of India to increase the government's interface in space sector with the private sector. Both have this broad mandate. So let's talk about this specific news item first. So what the news item here it says that InSpace, that is the Indian National Space Promotion and Authorization Center, it has proposed to establish Antriksh Prayogshala labs or space labs in some select higher education institutions to basically create a better ecosystem for research, for skilling of space scientists in the country, and it will help boost industry academia linkage as well, and of course in the long run make India a leader of the global space economy. So currently the global space economy is about $8 billion, and India is contributing only less than okay, I'm not exactly recalling this figure, but yes, it's less than about 1 to 2%. So there is a lot of, I think it's 2% only. Indian contribution to the global space economy is about 2%. So there is a very huge scope for growth, and the global space economy, you know what, I'll have to check these metrics. Yeah. Okay, so the global space India's contribution to the global space economy is very minuscule right now, that's for certain. So there is a lot of scope for growth, and these space labs, that is Antriksh Prayogshalas, can help increase the contribution. And the next news item is this ISRO's Bluebird Block 2 mission. So basically this is a commercial project that was forwarded by ISRO's commercial arm, that is NSIL, which is New Space India Limited, with a US company, and it's a communication satellite, and this company is trying to establish a space first communication system, and for that it intends to launch a lot of satellites. So this was one of those, and the LVM-3, that is the launch vehicle module 3 of ISRO, which is its largest and the most heaviest launcher was used for this. And The Bluebird Block 2 mission, just first of all, remember the name of this mission for purposes of the prelims examination. So this mission will make the satellite as part of the global LEO constellation. LEO is basically the low Earth orbits, and NSIL is the commercial arm of ISRO. So low, I'm just going to very quickly talk about low, medium, and low Earth orbit, medium Earth orbit, and the geostationary orbits. So low Earth orbit is basically 100 to 2000 kilometers off from the Earth's surface. Middle Earth orbit is 2000 to 20,000 kilometers, and then the geostationary orbit is 36,000 kilometers. So the geostationary orbit, as you can see, it's not a range. Like middle Earth and low Earth orbits are from, they have some ranges. The geostationary orbit is not a range because this is the exact distance. Actually, it's not 36,000. Actually, it's 35,600 something. That's the exact distance from at which the satellite needs to be from the Earth's surface to be geostationary. Geostationary means it is fixed over a single point over the Earth, and it rotates along with the Earth. So if this is the Earth, if let's say this is the Earth that's rotating, the satellite is rotating with this. So it from the Earth, it seems like it's fixed in the sky. And if we look at the LEO and the MEO satellites, they rotate around the Earth very fast actually. So if we look at the low Earth orbit satellites, they rotate around the Earth in about 90 minutes. So any low Earth orbit satellite is rotating once around the Earth in 90 minutes, and the middle Earth orbit satellites are rotating around the Earth in anywhere from 2 to 12 hours. So they are quite fast that way. Okay, so that is it. Now, I'll move on to in space versus NSIL just a moment. Firstly, I'll just take a moment to talk about the launch vehicles of ISRO, which is very important for the prelims examination. And basically, currently ISRO has 4 types of launch vehicles. We have the PSLV, Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle, the GSLV, that is the GSLV. This is still Mark II. Then the GSLV Mark III was a different launch vehicle, which is also called the LVM-3 now. And this is the SSLV, which is the small satellite launch vehicle. It's a new one. So the SSLV is the ISRO was basically trying to outsource the manufacturing of SSLV because it wants to focus more on research part of things. So I think that the SSLV, okay, I'll just look on it. I think that the Pakistan Aeronautics Limited, it got the contract for SSLV. Anyways, I'll just check on that. So yeah, and the GSLV Mark III, LVM-3, this is going to be the primary launch vehicle for the Gaganyaan mission as well. That is ISRO's upcoming human space flight. And the LVM-3 or the GSLV Mark III can take loads at quite heavy loads. And for example, this Bluebird Block 2 mission, this was a 6,100 kilogram satellite. It was the heaviest satellite that took off from the Indian subcontinent. Basically, it was the heaviest launch by ISRO till now. So that's quite a feat. Next, moving on to in space versus NSIL. Very quickly, we'll just see this comparison. So very broadly, both have the mandate of increasing ISRO's interface, ISRO and the Indian government's Department of Space's interface with the private sector. In space is like an autonomous regulatory agency, and NSIL is basically a PSU. It's a PSU under Department of Space. So this is the commercial arm of ISRO. Commercial arm of ISRO means that it has the responsibility of commercializing ISRO's services. So ISRO provides, for example, ISRO provides launch services, satellite launching services. So it is the responsibility of the NSIL that if there is any company that wants to use ISRO for its launches, NSIL will bring the two together. So this US company called AST Space Mobile, this basically approached NSIL to get ISRO to launch its own satellite. Then in space, on the other hand, since it's a regulatory agency under Department of Space, it does many roles. It promotes, enables, authorizes, supervises non-government entities to undertake space activities. For example, this is basically a facilitator. So for example, if there is a space startup, let's say there is Skyroot. Skyroot Aerospace needs to collaborate with ISRO regarding some, either there needs to be a technology transfer, or Skyroot needs help of ISRO for some services, some technology transfer, some skilling, some development. Who will it approach? It won't approach NSIL because it's not looking for exactly launching a satellite. It just wants ISRO's oversight on its own operations. It will approach InSpace because InSpace acts as the facilitator of increasing the private interface of ISRO. And yes, and NSIL is the primary commercial arm, so it launches these satellites, but authorization of these satellite launches is done by ISRO, InSpace. So it might be a little difficult for some people to understand, but it's a very small thing. But yes, it's very prominent also, that basically this is the commercial arm and this is the facilitator and regulatory arm. So if anyone wants, they can take the screenshot of this slide and we can move on to the last topic for today, which is part of GS3, Indian economy, government budgeting, inflation, monetary fiscal policy. It's a mix of all. What happened? Okay, so what is happening right now? If we look at the last few months, India's inflation, CPI inflation, that is the consumer inflation, it has been less than 2%. And what is 2%? This is the lower threshold limit, lower limit of the Monetary Policy Committee, which has to work in the window of 2 to 4% inflation. Sorry, 2 to 6%. 4 plus minus 2%, that is 2 to 6% inflation. So if the inflation increases above 6%, which we have seen quite a lot actually, because food and beverages, oil prices, these are all very volatile commodities whose prices vary very wildly. So when they fluctuate wildly, we have seen inflation going above 6% quite a lot of times, especially post-COVID. But our inflation being less than 2% for quite a few months at a stretch, this does not happen that frequently, mainly because India is a developing nation. We are a very highly consumption driven nation, because about 58 to 60% of our GDP is from consumption. And when we are there, the nation is such consumption driven, the demand generally of products remains high, and because demand remains high, the prices remain relatively high, and hence low inflation is one problem that we generally do not face a lot, but we have been facing now. So it's an issue because this window of 2 to 6% is there for a reason. If the inflation goes above 6%, there are own issues. People stop consuming, the inventories go unsold because they are too expensive. Because inventories go unsold, the investor sentiment also reduces. Some similar things and some different things are also seen when inflation goes below 2%, because okay, first we'll take a break to understand the concepts of inflation, deflation and disinflation. Like, what exactly is this? Inflation is basically increase in price of things. Deflation is when the prices start decreasing. For example, I'm buying a set of pens for 100 rupees this year, and without any change they reduce to 90 next year, because people are not buying them, because they are they're finding this to be too expensive. They just stop buying it, so the supplier has to reduce the price of the pens to 90 rupees, and this is a deflationary thing that is happening. Then there is disinflation. Disinflation is basically inflation is happening, but the pace of inflation has reduced. So where India, a country like India, where 6 to 8% inflation is not unheard of, generally is the norm, inflation less than 2% for quite a few months is actually disinflationary. And disinflation also has its own aspect, own issues, like I was talking. And what can these be? So firstly, this is by default very bad for developing nations like India, especially consumption driven nations like India, because 60% of our GDP, like I mentioned, comes from consumption demand. And if there is disinflation, it means that people are not wanting to buy a lot of things. Because if people have wanted to buy a lot of things, the price would have increased on its own. But since the prices are decreasing, it means that consumption is slow. There is a demand deficit basically, and because there is a demand deficit, there will be a consumption delay. And this generally happens because either the people are not wanting to buy, mainly because they are not finding the economy to be they are not finding enough confidence in the economy. Because they sometimes, for example, if let's say if I want to buy a house, generally I will buy the house by expecting that its price may appreciate going ahead, and because its price may appreciate going ahead, uh, I'll get a positive return. But if I am not confident in the economy, if I'm seeing that the prices are going down, if I'm seeing that there are recessionary tendencies in the economy, I will stop buying, I will not buy. And that is basically leading to a demand deficit. And because there's a demand deficit, I might it might lead to consumption delay of certain retail items, because uh, in comparison to something that I might expect to appreciate, for example, a house which I'm putting off buying, there are other things that I want to the prices to decrease. For example, if there's a car, then if I'm looking to buy a car is by nature a depreciating asset, so I do not expect its price to increase. But if I can get that price if I can get that car for a much cheaper price, I will delay my consumption right now so that I can buy it next year when it will be much cheaper. And this is the problem that leads to a very vicious cycle of low demand, leading to more higher inventory stocks, leading to low profits for the private sector, leading to less investor sentiment in the private sector, and leading to layoffs of people, reduced wages of people, further fueling low consumption demand because the disposable income with those employees reduces. So it is basically a recessionary circle that goes around and around, and a vicious cycle starts. And consumption delay, and then of course, like I mentioned, that because people are there's a demand deficit, people are delaying the consumption, it is a sign of overcapacity. Basically, that inventories are being left unsold, and because inventories are being left unsold, the prices of these goods might further decrease, and again fueling into that vicious cycle which I was talking about, that if I want something and I want it to be cheaper, I will probably delay that, I will buy that next year. But again, like, because I'm expecting the price to decrease, overcapacity further push down prices. Low inflation also leads to low profits because inventories pile up, like I mentioned. Yes, and because inventories pile up, there will be lower investor sentiment. And yes, okay, so these two concepts I need to discuss: higher in real interest rate and liquidity trap. Okay, I'll discuss them here. Real interest rate equal to nominal interest rate. Okay, let's say the real interest rate was, for example, uh, it's, let's say it's, this is pegged to, okay, let's say the real interest rate was 6% and the inflation was 3%. Let's say the nominal interest rate, sorry, this is pegged to the repo rate and inflation is, let's say, 3%, and this is, let's say, 6%. The real interest rate that will be there is basically 3%, because inflation is this much, repo rate is this much, is this much. Let's say without changing the repo rate, without changing the nominal interest rate in the economy, the inflation reduces to 1%, as it is being seen now. The real interest rate in the economy becomes 5% without any change by the monetary policy side of the Reserve Bank. So a higher interest rate in its own nature is contractionary. Basically, that the private sector, if it has to take loans to invest more, or if it has to take loans to expand its capacity, it will not end up doing so, because the real interest rate is high. That is also an issue with disinflationary trends that is being currently seen in the Indian economy. Now, another concept is liquidity trap, and Japan is a very good example of this. So what happens in liquidity trap is that the inflation is already very low. For example, in India, currently, let's say the inflation is 1%. Inflation is already very low, and even when the inflation is very low, it is at least expected that the because the inflation is low, and because the central bank also reduces the policy rates. For example, the MPC recently reduced the policy rates by 25 basis points, and because the repo rate is also low, it is at least expected that the private sector will take some loans, expand its capacity, invest more. There will be uh, there will be increased wages, there will be increased capacity, there will be increased production, which will set off the virtuous cycle of the economy. But because the people are so dejected by the economy, they don't have any confidence in the economy, that, and one aspect of it is that they stop buying stuff, which leads to lower inflation. This starts a vicious cycle, where even very low interest rates, they do not spur any demand. And Japan was a basket case of this, because even when the interest rates were 0% in that economy, people were still not buying, people were still not ready to invest, because they did not see the economy to be that fruitful even going ahead. So this is the concept of liquidity trap, where even very low interest rates fail to push any demand, and this is like a failure. This whole concept is like a failure of monetary policy. It's a reflection of failure of monetary policy, and basically the limitations of monetary policy, that it does not matter how much interest rates or repo rates the RBI reduces, people still will not take any loans to expand capacity or increase production and start up the virtuous cycle of the economy. So that is more or less it. Issues with too low inflation. And yes, some aspects that were mentioned here. Currently, inflation has been less than 4% for 9 months. The average 25-26 inflation is projected to be 2%. And one difference I wanted to talk about: headline and core inflation. Headline CPI inflation is what we see in the papers. Like, for example, if I'm talking about 4%, 2 to 6% bracket, that is basically for the headline CPI inflation, that all the aspects of CPI are considered. Core inflation is a little different, where some volatile components of CPI, for example, food, beverages, fuels, they are removed because their prices vary a lot, and core inflation. So the problem right now, why economists are ringing alarm bells at such low inflation for such a long time, is that not only the core inflation is low, which is at least expected to an extent, even the headline CPI inflation is low. Basically, even the volatile commodities are not increasing in price. So that's why this is an issue. And if we look at the Monetary Policy Committee, which decides the policy rates, that is the repo rates, which reduced the repo rate by 25 basis points in its last meeting, it has statutory backing under the RBI Act 1934, and its primary mandate is inflation targeting. And this again 6%. Its basic window is 2 to 6%, basically 4 plus minus 2%. And repo rate is one of the primary tools, not the only tool. There are other open market operations as well, but we won't go into them right now. Repo rate is one of the primary tools of inflation targeting. Now, because the inflation is so low, there needs to be some way forward that we can think on. One is, of course, monetary easing. Basically, what the RBI is already doing, it is reducing the repo rates. There needs to be further reduction of repo rates so that it can spur some demand in the economy. Then this is a very good thing, and it's happening also. There needs to be an increased government spending. For example, after 2 quarters have passed, that is half a year has been passed, it was there was a newspaper report, that the fiscal deficit of the government is at 56% of the entire year's budgeted deficit. So that's a good sign that the government has already spent 56% of its intended fiscal deficit. And generally, the government is also, it's a good thing that the government is also spending on good capital expenditure. So it's a good fiscal deficit. And if 56% of it has been spent, it's a good sign. Going ahead, of course, there needs to be a strategic communication to the people also to boost demand. The RBI, both the government and the RBI, both the monetary and fiscal policy side stakeholders, they need to communicate to the people that they need to, the people need to have confidence in the economy. They need to buy as much as they can, of course. And the government's good strategic communication aspects were visible, for example, in the GST Utsav, for example, that it termed as the GST festival, which actually helped spur demand to an extent as well. And another thing is that the government can let and try INR depreciate, because, and this needs to be seen as a very last resort step if it needs to be taken, but this is something that can be done. And I think that is what the RBI is also letting loose right now, because the INR has passed the 91 to the dollar mark, and the RBI, it was also reported that the RBI has not intervened into the forex market as much as it did last year. Basically, the RBI is letting the rupee depreciate, and I think that the inflation aspect of it is also one thing that can be considered here, because the RBI letting the rupee depreciate will directly feed into imported inflation as well, because we are an import driven economy. Of course, it will help us increase our exports as well, and the RBI was letting the INR depreciate to offset the negative aspect of US tariffs as well, to increase our exports. Yes, that was one thing, but yes, the inflation aspect also is important, because if the RBI lets the INR depreciate, it will help us relatively uh, increase the inflation through imported inflation, because we are an import driven economy, as I mentioned. I think that is more or less it with the news items of 20th and 21st December. Thank you from my side, and this is Harsh Singh signing off. Thank you.